So this is a continuation of my spiritual journey, and if you haven't seen the first part, this part probably won't make much sense. So I would encourage anybody who's listening to this installment to go back and listen to part 1. So this is part 2, and I left off the first episode. We were just about to move. So I'll take up the story with this move. We moved. We had been sojourning, I guess you could say, in Egypt for a year, and we were now moving to what would turn out to be a more permanent place of residence. And actually I wound up living there for just over 15 years, so I was able to settle in. So we moved, and it was a farm, and it was a place that actually I had picked out. Of kind of like I felt like Joshua spying out the promised land when I was looking for this farm. But anyways, that's another story for another time. So we left the church that we were in our sojourn, and came into this new place where we were living, and we were back in the Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada church, and it was a good church. I can't say anything overly negative about the church. It was quite a well run and quite a traditional church for that time. You have to understand that at this point in time, there were things going on in the charismatic and Pentecostal world that were rather extreme, I guess, to use a word. There were events and happenings and trends and currents sort of eddying all around that were pulling people hither and yon, and this little enclave church was sort of holding the fort, as it were, and a little bit behind the times, but that wasn't really a bad thing, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So we don't need to be constantly updating and changing just to keep up with the times or the Joneses. So I was settled into that church as a family. I was still living with my parents, and we settled in, and on the farm, we had a dairy farm, and I began getting involved in the church. I was growing, and particularly as a result of my scripture reading and study from the year we spent in Egypt, let's say. I was learning a lot about the Bible and about scripture, and eventually I ended up being asked to teach an adult Sunday school class. I was elected to serve on the board of the church. It's sort of like a board of directors. They called us deacons, but we weren't really deacons. We were kind of like a vestry, if you know what that means, if you're Anglican. And I was periodically I would teach a Wednesday night adult Bible study. I sort of missed youth group. I was involved with the youth group for the first couple of years as a participant, but then I was old enough, and then all the other members of the youth group were quite a bit younger, almost 10 years younger than I was. By this time, I was in my early 20s, 22, 23, 24, 25, and I really didn't fit in with the youth group. So I kind of just migrated over to the adult, midweek Bible study and prayer meeting. And so I was asked to teach that periodically, and I actually enjoyed that. I really enjoyed teaching adult Sunday school and adult Bible study and so forth. So I was also plowing the church parking lot in the wintertime. I was the guy with the four-wheel drive tractor, so I would plow the parking lot, and I became the head usher, which, if you're not familiar, this is the person who hands out bulletins at the start of the service and greets people at the door and shows them to their seat, and also takes up the collection and then winds up counting the offerings afterwards and filling out the paperwork and doing the deposit after, and it's I have a lot of respect for people who work hard in the church, because there's a lot of behind the scenes things that go on that are not they're not really appreciated, and they're taken for granted. I really feel that for the most part there are things taken for granted in the church, and so anyways, there I am. I'm involved with the church, and over time, as I got into my mid and into my later 20s, approaching 30, I began to sense a bit of a missing piece in the whole picture. Going back to my puzzle analogy, I was trying to put this puzzle together, trying to bind things up into some sort of cohesive package. Religion really got it's to bind up. It has to you have to be able to tie both ends together, and I was just feeling like there's something missing. And one of the things, there's two or three things, but the main thing that I kind of guess got me was wondering about all this was the lack of theological depth. And I used to be quite a reader. I still love to read and enjoy reading. I just don't have a lot of time for it. But back then I would read. I was one of those people who, if I got a hold of a book I liked, I would read, all night. So I always enjoyed going into used bookstores and antique shops, and I would find these old theological books, mostly Protestant. And so I would read in these books, and I would just blown away by the terminology and the language, and I'm thinking, well, I don't hear about this on, Sunday morning or Sunday night or Wednesday night. So I was like, these people are almost speaking a different language, these theological heavy books, but I found them interesting, and I'm like, why isn't this in my denomination? How come these are people from other traditions talking, deeply about theological issues? So that was the number one thing. There was a lack of theological depth, no systematic, dogmatic, doctrinal piece. It was just a piece of the puzzle that I couldn't see, at least in the church that I was attending. And that was the number one piece. And then the number two piece was the what we called worship, and it was the singing and the hand clapping and this and that and the other, and the lyrics of the songs. And I found myself more and more standing back as almost a third party observer. I would, and actually in a way I was an usher. I was standing at the back of the church on a Sunday morning, standing by the door and watching and observing, almost like I was like a cameraman on a set. And I would see this unfold in front of me, this, what we call, the church service. And it followed a very definite form and structure, and each service had a progression through it. And by far the largest part of it was the sermon, but there was singing before and after, and a pastoral prayer and collection, and and this and that and the other, and then a finishing up song and a prayer, and then away we go, and there was always the handshake halfway through it. And I began more and more to be less enchanted with the style and the content of this type of church service, and it became irritating in a way, and I found myself spiritually frustrated. So those two things, a lack of theological depth and the seeker-sensitive, man-centric, the shallow lyrics, the sort of what they would call a song service, if you've ever heard that term. It's a bit old school now, but there was another issue that was coming over me, and that was my own devotional life, my own prayer life, my own spiritual life in private, not public, but private. I was feeling like I was becalmed in the middle of the ocean and no breeze in sight. I felt like I had just reached a point where I could neither go forwards or backwards or left or right. It was like no matter what I tried to do, and I wasn't one of these people who goes chasing after, I didn't have a television at the time, so I wasn't, interested. I didn't even have the internet at that time. I wasn't interested in, the charismatic TV evangelist type religion. I'd never liked that, and still don't. And so I found myself at something of a loss, and then I really started searching for ways to deepen my prayer life and deepen my spiritual reading. And I happened to be in a Christian bookstore one day, and I saw a book by a lady by the name of Frederica Matthews Green, and some other books, which I was able to purchase, and they were, I forget the exact titles, but it was called Reaching Out Without Dumbing Down was one of them, but they were basically Protestant arguments for more formal liturgical worship. They were sort of a reaction against this trend of fly-by-night, charismatic, seat of your pants, happy clappy praise and worship, song and dance worship that had really taken the church by storm. But anyways, getting back to Frederica Matthews Green, her book was, it was called At the Corner of East and Now, and she was an Eastern Orthodox convert. And I read the book, and I'm like, this is totally different. Absolutely. Totally different than what I had previously thought. Like, this had never even entered into my mind, but I'm like eating it up like it was like I was starving. So I decided to look into this. What's this orthodoxy? I had some inkling of it by the time I got done the book. So I found another couple of books by Father Alexander Schmemann, and they were the Great Lent and Liturgical Theology, and I read those two books from an Eastern Orthodox perspective, and he sort of laid out the faith from the Orthodox perspective, and I was quite intrigued by this, and I got inspired. I wouldn't say I was given any firm direction, but I was certainly inspired to think about faith and the church and salvation and God in a different way, in a deeper and different way. And this was what I needed at the time to sort of get my mind going. It was like a little breeze that began to push my sails, and I was able to at least say, okay, we're moving, we've got a breeze here, let's see if we can trim these sails to take advantage of this thing. So this was good. What I did was look around for a more accessible form of Eastern Orthodoxy, because where in the part of the world where I live, the Eastern Orthodox, all Orthodox, are very culturally based. It's you are Orthodox because you are Greek, or you're Orthodox because you are Russian, or you are Orthodox because you are whatever. That's why you are Orthodox. It's very much tied to your genetic, whatever you want to call it. It's a tradition that's been passed down, and we come from here, so this is what we are, and so on and so forth. And so it's very hard for outsiders to really ever feel comfortably at home. So I was looking for something that was a little more accessible. So I turned to the internet by this time. I'd got a computer, and the internet was just kind of coming into its own being, and I actually discovered the Anglican way of prayer and the 1962 Canadian Book of Common Prayer, which I believe was one of the last full revisions of the Book of Common Prayer based on the traditional, like the 1662 Book of Common Prayer, or 1549 if you want to go way back. But so the 1962 Canadian Book of Common Prayer, which is the official Canadian prayer book. If you go to an Anglican Church of Canada parish that actually uses the prayer book, this is the version that you'll probably find in the pews. As far as I know, no, I haven't been to an Anglican Church of Canada parish in probably close to 20 years, but I'm pretty sure they still use the same prayer book. So what the prayer book has is a lectionary, which is a way of dividing up the Bible. And by the way, they actually use the Deuterocanon in the lectionary, both for weekday readings and Sunday readings. So it divides the whole Bible up, and the Psalms, and basically you read through the Psalms right through every month, and then you read through the whole entire Bible according to the lectionary, and it gives you readings for each day, in the morning and in the evening, and on Sundays. And in the Sunday readings is a 2-year cycle. There's year 1 and there's year 2. And Now, it's been a few years since I've prayed with the lectionary, but that's the gist of it. It breaks the Bible down into sort of a systematic reading program. So that was the first part. And then the second part is there are what they call the orders for morning and evening prayer, or matins and evensong. And these are very structured ways, and they include the daily readings. There's places in the offices, they call them, the orders for morning and evening prayer, where you read a first lesson and a second lesson, and then it's generally an Old Testament and a New Testament, and then there are other psalms. So the lectionary is to be used in conjunction with the rest of the liturgical rites that are found in the prayer book. So the morning prayer it corresponds to the lectionary. Evening prayer, it corresponds to the lectionary. And on Sundays, it corresponds to the lectionary, whether you're year 1 or you're year 2, and so it all fits together. So this is like a game plan that I find, and I'm like, this is cool. This like takes a lot of the guesswork out of it. I'm just going to do this. So I started doing that, and it was very beneficial to follow a structured format where you are given set scriptures to read on a given day, and they followed a theme and a pattern. And actually, once you go through the whole cycle about 2 or 3 times, you begin to see this picture, this puzzle begins to take shape, and you begin to see that at certain seasons of the year, whether it's the seasons outside the window or the seasons in your heart or the seasons on the liturgical calendar, there you begin to see pattern and form and structure, and you begin to see this narrative take shape. And you don't really see it consciously at first, but then as you go through this, it begins to shape or take shape and to take form and become very concrete. And you begin to realize that every year, particularly in the Sunday readings for the lectionary, you're beginning to follow the life of Christ. And it becomes a part of your daily devotional life. You're sort of journeying with Jesus as you read the Bible and you pray. So I found that the Book of Common Prayer, morning and evening prayer, and the lectionary were very conducive to spiritual growth for me. The downside of that was I would be praying and reading the Bible according to, the Anglican way, and then on Sunday I would go to the Pentecostal church, and I would be like, oh, this is horrible. And so I began to, I think, grow away from and grow out of that style of church service that I had grown up with. I just began to develop a different worldview, a different spirituality that it no longer expressed, just singing songs, and clapping my hands and then sitting down and listening to a sermon for 45 minutes. It just wasn't helpful for me spiritually, and I found it actually detrimental. It was sort of causing me spiritual unrest and discontent in a way. So that really was brought to a head. As I mentioned before, I was teaching an adult Sunday school class, And I found myself, as I was, you know, reading more and more, and I was studying to, you know, particularly Anglican authors, but also Catholic authors, I was beginning to find myself more and more at odds with the material, the curriculum that I was using in teaching the adult Sunday school class. So that sort of brings me to the conclusion of this installment. I'm at a bit of a crisis point in my faith. It's going well on the one hand, and it's going not so well on the other hand. And so I'll leave it at that for now, and I'll continue on with my story in the next installment. So take care.